ANZAC Day. What, I hear you asking, is that? My overseas viewers may not know, in fact they probably don't know, what ANZAC Day is. It has to do with the Gallipoli landing, which took place during the First World War. It's a very big day in Australia and seemingly becoming bigger every year. ANZAC, ANZAC, stands for Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. For anyone wanting more details, a quick Google search will yield hundreds of thousands of results. So today, the 25th of April, marks the anniversary of the attempt during the First World War by the Allied forces, including Australia, to invade that well-known enemy of Australia, Turkey. The attempt was ill-conceived and disastrous. I believe Churchill had something to do with it. Unsurprisingly, the Turks vigorously and successfully defended their home territory. Here in Australia, we commemorate this event as ANZAC Day. I'm not sure how they commemorate it in Turkey. I imagine they remember it with some pride, although I imagine they also now welcome the influx of tourists that hits their shores at this time every year. It was a massive catastrophe for the Allied forces, which resulted in the deaths of about 44,000 Allied troops. Though it's worth remembering that the Turks lost some 87,000 troops during that campaign. About 8,000 Australians died on the beaches of what is now ANZAC Cove. Although claimed by Australia and New Zealand, we should remember that over 21,000 British troops also died during this debacle, as well as tens of thousands of French troops. It's almost sacrilegious and possibly even considered treasonous to say anything in Australia that might be regarded as a criticism of this day. Few people in Australia regard Christmas or Easter celebrations with anything approaching religious reverence. ANZAC Day is the only holiday in the Australian calendar that attracts this kind of reverence from the religious and the non-religious alike. Whatever is going on around ANZAC Day in Australia is a little strange and perhaps also a little disturbing, if not frightening. Whatever it is, ANZAC Day is not simply a day when we commemorate and honour those whose lives have been lost in war. We have Remembrance Day, or perhaps you know it better as Armistice Day, the 11th of November, on which to do that. At least that marks the end of the First World War, a suitable time, you'd think, to remember the cost of war. ANZAC Day commemorates an attempt to invade another country for strategic purposes, to control the Dardanelles, a strait providing a sea route to the Russian Empire. It is, of course, tragic that so many people lost their lives in that pointless exercise. The Turks who lost their lives during that campaign were defending their homeland. The Australians who tragically died were not defending Australia, despite the propaganda that surrounds ANZAC Day. The Reserve Bank of Australia Museum website, who even knew there was such a thing, describes the Gallipoli invasion as follows. I'll put a link down below. It was a display of strength, fortitude and courage in the face of great adversity. For a nation that had been a federal commonwealth for only 14 years, this moment was a coming of age, cementing in the minds of Australia and the world the indelible image of the unfaltering ANZAC spirit. This was Australia's coming of age? So, was Jimmy's first knife fight his coming of age? Is this what we associate with growing up, becoming a man? I find something quite distasteful in this. I'm not sure anyway that we as a nation learned any valuable lessons at all. During the 1960s and through into the early 1970s, Australia was all the way with LBJ and its involvement with the war in Vietnam. Is that the lesson we learned? If Australia had said at that time, "No thanks, President Johnson, we'll pass on that one," that I might consider a coming of age. There's another website that I want to quote. This is from the Torquay Museum Without Walls. Again, who knew there was such a thing? I'll put the link below. On both sides of the Tasman, we mark ANZAC Day as a heroic defeat, a baptism of fire for both nations. This has overshadowed the 46,000 Australian deaths on the Western Front, with a further 124,000 wounded, sometimes multiple times. These men endured years of ill health, disfigurement, and disability. This seems to me to be a much more realistic perspective on what was taking place. Look, I'm all in favour of remembering the horrors of war and commemorating the tragic and often pointless loss of life. Remembrance Day, though, is a perfect time to do that. I'm much less comfortable with the mythology that continues to build around the commemoration of ANZAC Day. I in no way want to belittle the price the men paid at Gallipoli, Allied troops and Turks alike, but it's a stretch to claim that the Australians, at least, gave their lives in defence of Australia. It's sad but true, and no fault of theirs, that they gave their lives in a much less worthy cause.